A desperate father auctions his 3 daughters to pay gambling debts, treating them like property to be sold to the highest bidder. Samuel McKenna, a weathered Union veteran and ranch owner, witnesses this horrific scene and makes a shocking decision that will change 7 lives forever. He outbids everyone, pays the full debt, and takes the sisters home not as slaves but as potential wives for his 3 war-scarred sons. Samuel's radical plan challenges everything the community believes about race, marriage, and human dignity in 1867 Texas. Now he must convince his bitter sons and the terrified sisters that love can grow from respect rather than ownership. Gunfire cracked across the McKenna ranch like thunder before dawn. Samuel McKenna lay twisted in the dirt, fingers clutching a blood-stained letter. His breath came in shallow pulls against the Texas ground. 3 fresh graves scarred the earth. Nearby, Jacob Thomas and Daniel McKenna stood over them, shovels still gripped in calloused hands. Sweat mixed with something darker on their faces. The sisters were gone. Dust kicked up from the horizon. A lone rider approached through the morning haze. Samuel's eyes found the sky. The letter crinkled in his grip. 6 months earlier, the same sky had burned over Redemption, Texas. Samuel McKenna rode into town with dust coating his Union coat. The fabric held the weight of too many battles, too many graves. His horse moved with the steady gait of an animal that had seen enough of the world to know when to hurry and when to wait. A crowd gathered outside the Red Dog Saloon. Voices carried on the wind like smoke. Samuel dismounted. His boots found the ground with the certainty of a man who had walked through worse places than this. A makeshift platform stood in the street. 3 young women waited on it, chains binding their wrists. The metal caught sunlight like broken glass. The eldest stared straight ahead, her jaw set like stone against whatever was coming. The middle sister kept her eyes down, hands folded in a prayer that seemed to cost her everything. The youngest trembled like leaves before a storm. A broken man paced the platform. Ezekiel Harper looked like he had been hollowed out and left to dry in the sun. His voice cracked as he called out prices. "These are my daughters, good workers, strong backs, young enough to bear children for years to come." Samuel's stomach turned. The crowd pressed closer, men calling out numbers like they were bidding on livestock. $50 for the youngest, $75 for all 3, $100 for the tall one. Samuel stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. $500. The crowd went silent. Ezekiel's eyes widened. $500 for all 3. Cash money. Samuel reached into his coat. The bills felt heavy in his hands, heavier than they should have been. He counted them out slow and deliberate, each one a choice he could not take back. Ezekiel snatched the money. His hands shook as he counted it twice, then a 3rd time. Done. The chains came off. The 3 sisters stood free for the first time in months, maybe years. They looked at Samuel like he might be another kind of trap. Samuel tipped his hat to them, his voice gentled. "Ladies, my name is Samuel McKenna. You are safe now." The eldest sister spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had stopped believing in safety long ago. "What do you want from us?" "To give you a choice." The ride to the McKenna ranch passed in silence. The sisters sat in the wagon bed, pressed close together like they could disappear if they made themselves small enough. Samuel drove the team with steady hands, his eyes on the road ahead. The ranch spread out under the endless sky. Weathered buildings squatted against the horizon like old bones. Cattle grazed in pastures that had seen better years. Everything looked worn thin by wind and time and the weight of trying to survive. 3 men waited on the porch. They had Samuel's height and his steady way of standing, but their faces carried different kinds of damage. Jacob, the eldest, leaned against a post with his arms crossed. His eyes held the flat look of someone who expected the worst from every situation. The war had taken his softness and left only edges. Thomas stood straighter, hands clasped behind his back. Something gentle remained in his face, but it warred with shadows that lived behind his eyes. He watched the approaching wagon like it might contain either salvation or damnation. Daniel paced at the edge of the porch. The youngest McKenna son moved with restless energy, like he was always ready to prove something to someone. His youth made him dangerous in the way of untested things. Samuel brought the wagon to a stop. He climbed down and turned to help the sisters, but the eldest had already jumped to the ground. She helped her sisters down with careful hands. "Boys, I want you to meet Mercy, Faith, and Hope." Mercy stood tallest, her chin raised like a challenge. Faith kept close to her sisters but met their eyes when spoken to. Hope stayed half hidden behind the others, but her gaze darted everywhere, taking measure of exits and threats. Jacob pushed, off from the post. "Pa, what exactly are you doing?" Samuel looked at his sons, then at the sisters. The weight of what he was about to say settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. "I am giving us all a chance at something better." He gestured toward the house. "These ladies need a home. You boys need wives. This ranch needs a future." The silence stretched tight as a rope before breaking. Jacob's laugh held no humor. "You bought us wives like cattle. I bought them freedom. What they do with it is their choice." Thomas stepped forward. His voice came quiet but firm. "What kind of choice is it, Pa? They have nowhere else to go. They can leave any time. I will give them money for passage wherever they want to go, but I hoped they might stay, help us build something worth having." Mercy spoke into the silence that followed. "And what would you expect from us in return?" Samuel met her eyes. Partnership, respect, a life built on something other than fear. Hope spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we cannot love your sons? Then you will be sisters to them instead. This family has room for whatever kind of bond you can manage." The wind kicked up dust around them. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out against the endless sky. Jacob shook his head. "This is madness, Pa." "Maybe, but it is our madness to make or unmake." 3 days later, Sheriff Hawkins rode up with the traveling preacher in tow. The preacher's black coat flapped like wings in the wind. His face carried the certainty of a man who had never doubted his own righteousness. They found the family working in the kitchen garden. The sisters knelt in the dirt beside Faith, planting seeds for vegetables that might feed them through the winter. The sons worked nearby, mending fence posts that would keep the cattle from wandering. "McKenna," the sheriff's voice carried official weight. "We need to talk." Samuel straightened. Dirt clung to his knees. "Sheriff? Preacher?" The preacher stepped forward. His eyes swept over the sisters with obvious disapproval. "Mr. McKenna, I understand you have acquired some young ladies in need of proper Christian guidance. I have offered shelter to 3 women who needed it. Their souls require salvation, not whatever arrangement you have contrived here." Mercy stood slowly. Dirt fell from her skirts like sand. "Our souls are our own concern." The preacher's face reddened. "Child, you do not understand the danger you are in. This situation is improper, unholy. More unholy than being sold like livestock? I offer you passage to a proper Christian household in the East. You would be cared for appropriately." Faith joined her sister. Her voice stayed level but carried iron underneath. "Cared for by whom? And under what conditions?" "Good Christian families who would see to your moral education." Hope rose last. Her voice shook but held firm. "We have already chosen our family." The preacher turned to Samuel. "I will not allow this corruption to continue." Samuel stepped between the preacher and the sisters. His hand rested near the gun on his hip, not threatening but present. "These ladies are free to choose their own path. If they want to go with you, I will not stop them. But I will not let you force them." The sheriff cleared his throat. "McKenna, the town is concerned about the nature of your household arrangements. The town can concern itself with its own business. This is our business when it affects the moral character of the community." Mercy moved to stand beside Samuel. Faith and Hope flanked her. The McKenna sons closed ranks behind their father. "Then we choose to stay." Mercy said. All of us. The preacher's mouth worked like a fish out of water. You do not know what you are choosing. We know what we are choosing instead of. The riders left with dust swirling behind them. The family watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer. Samuel turned to the sisters. You could have gone. Started fresh somewhere else. Mercy brushed dirt from her hands. We are starting fresh here. The first battle was won, but the war for their right to choose their own lives had only just begun. 3 months passed like seasons compressed into heartbeats. The ranch found its rhythm in the spaces between words, in hands that learned to work together without asking permission. Mercy stood in the barn doorway at dawn, account ledgers balanced against her hip. Numbers flowed under her pen like water, finding its course. Jacob hammered fence posts nearby, each strike carrying more force than necessary. You are hitting those posts like they wronged you personally. Jacob paused mid-swing. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool morning air. Maybe they did. She moved closer. The ledger stayed tucked against her side like armor. The Johnson account is 3 months overdue. We could press them or find new buyers in San Antonio. You think I have not tried? I think you tried the way men try, all pride and bluster. Jacob set down the hammer. His eyes found hers across the dusty space. And how would you try? With patience, and the knowledge that desperate people make desperate choices. Something shifted in his face. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of respect. Show me. Faith knelt in the garden beside Thomas, her fingers gentle on tomato seedlings that might not survive the drought. The earth felt hard as stone beneath their knees. Each plant represented hope they could not afford to lose. Thomas worked without speaking, his movements careful and precise. The war had taught him to conserve everything, even words. Faith understood the language of silence better than most. She handed him seedlings one by one. Their fingers touched, briefly with each exchange. Neither pulled away. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals that carried no promise of rain. Faith watched its lazy circles and thought about faith itself, how it required believing in things that might never come. Do you think they will grow? Thomas followed her gaze to the sky. Some will. That is enough. Hope measured fence wire while Daniel held the posts steady. The work required precision, trust, the kind of coordination that came from learning each other's rhythms. Daniel's hands shook slightly, not from weakness but from the effort of staying gentle when everything in him wanted to prove his strength. Hope noticed but said nothing. Some wounds healed better in silence. Hand me the wire cutters. She passed them handle first. Their fingers brushed. Hope did not flinch. Daniel cut the wire with careful strokes, each piece exactly the length they needed, no waste, no excess. Hope watched his hands work and thought about the different ways men could use their strength. You are good at this. At cutting wire. At being careful. The compliment settled between them like morning dew, precious because it might burn, off with the rising sun. The town learned to avoid them gradually, the way water learns to flow around stones. Shopkeepers found reasons to close early when the McKennas approached. Children stared from doorways with the wide eyes of those who sensed scandal but could not name it. Mrs. Patterson crossed the street rather than pass Mercy on the sidewalk. Her skirts rustled with the sound of judgment-made fabric. Mercy kept, walking, spine straight as a rifle barrel. At the general store, Mr. Collins counted change twice before handing it over, as if contact with their coins might contaminate his till. Faith waited with the patience of someone who had learned that dignity cost more than most people could afford to pay. The Methodist minister delivered sermons about the sanctity of proper Christian households. His words fell on the congregation, like stones thrown at glass houses. Everyone understood who he meant without naming names. Sheriff Hawkins made regular visits, his badge catching sunlight like a warning. He asked polite questions about the nature of their living arrangements, the propriety of unmarried people sharing the same roof. Samuel answered with the courtesy due to law and the steel reserved for threats. Letters arrived from California. With increasing frequency, Samuel's brother wrote of opportunities, of land where the past mattered less than the willingness to work. The envelopes piled on the kitchen table like fallen leaves, each one carrying the weight of possibilities and exile. Faith discovered them by accident while cleaning. Her eyes moved across the careful script without permission, absorbing words that changed everything. "Come west," the letters said. "Bring your family. Start fresh where no one knows your history." She set the letters down with hands that trembled. Betrayal tasted like copper pennies on her tongue. That evening, Faith confronted Samuel in the barn. Lantern light carved shadows from their faces, making strangers of familiar features. "You plan to move us again?" Samuel continued brushing down his horse. The animal's flanks quivered under his steady strokes. "I plan for contingencies." "We are a contingency now?" "You are my family. I will do whatever necessary to protect you." Faith stepped closer. The lantern flame wavered between them. "Even if it means we never choose for ourselves?" Samuel's hand stilled on the brush. "What would you choose?" "To stay, to fight, to prove we belong here." "And if the fight costs more than we can afford to lose?" Faith met his eyes across the horse's back. "Some things are worth the cost." The confrontation drew the others like moths to flame. Mercy arrived with account books still clutched in her hands. Hope and the sons followed, their faces wearing the expressions of people who had learned to expect the worst from family meetings. Samuel set down the brush. His shoulders carried the weight of decisions he had hoped to delay. "My brother writes from California. He offers us a chance to start over." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Running away, you mean? Moving towards something better? Or proving that what we built here was never real?" Mercy opened one of her ledgers. Numbers and calculations covered the pages in her precise script. "We could make this ranch profitable, given time and the right opportunities. Time may not be something we have." Thomas spoke quietly from the shadows. "Why not?" Samuel reached into his coat. The letter he withdrew looked worn from handling. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Because I am dying." The words fell into silence deep as well water. No one moved. The horse stamped once, then settled. "The war left me with injuries that never healed properly. The doctor in town gives me 6 months, maybe less." Faith felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything she thought she understood rearranged itself like cards reshuffled by an invisible hand. "How long have you known?" "Since before I brought you home." The admission hit like a physical blow. Samuel continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I bought you freedom because I knew my time was short. I hoped to see my sons settled, this ranch secure, before I left them to face the world alone." Hope stepped forward. Her young face carried an old woman's understanding. "You were not trying to control us, you were trying to save us. All of us, before it was too late." Mercy closed her ledger with a sound like a door shutting. "Then we stay. We fight. We prove that what you started here matters more than what the town thinks." Jacob shook his head. "And when he is gone? When they come for us with no protection? Then we protect each other." The lantern flame guttered in a draft that came from nowhere. In the wavering light, 7 faces looked at each other across a divide that could not be measured in distance. Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed their ancient songs of hunger and contentment. The ranch settled around them like a living thing, breathing with the rhythm of those who called at home. Samuel folded the letter and returned it to his pocket. "We have time to decide, not much, but enough." Time. The word hung in the air like smoke, carrying the weight of all the choices they had yet to make, all the consequences they had yet to face. The future waited in the darkness beyond the barn doors, patient as predators, certain as sunrise. Samuel's illness became a 4th season on the ranch, changing everything without announcing itself. His morning cough carried the sound of leaves falling too early. His hands shook when he thought no one was watching. The family reorganized around his weakness like water flowing around stones. Mercy took over the accounts completely, her careful script replacing his shaking pen. Jacob handled negotiations with neighboring ranchers, his edge softened by necessity into something resembling diplomacy. Faith prepared teas from herbs that might ease Samuel's pain. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who understood that small kindnesses carried enormous weight. Thomas helped her gather roots and leaves, their shared silence more intimate than conversation. Hope and Daniel worked the furthest pastures together, checking cattle that grazed under an unforgiving sky. The drought had turned grass to dust, waterholes to cracked earth. Each day brought new evidence that the land itself was testing their resolve. The Johnson account paid, Mercy announced one morning, setting coins on the kitchen table. Full amount plus interest. Jacob looked up from his coffee. Steam rose between them like a question. How? I offered them a trade, grain through the winter in exchange for immediate payment and future considerations. They agreed to that? People respond better to partnership than demands. Jacob's smile came slow but genuine. Mercy felt something shift in her chest, a loosening she had not known was there. Thomas carried Samuel's breakfast to the porch each morning, helping the older man settle into his chair where he could watch the sun climb over their land. The ritual required no words, only the careful attention of someone who understood that time was a currency they could not afford to waste. Faith joined them with her sewing, her needle moving through fabric with the same precision she brought to everything else. Samuel watched her work with eyes that held both pride and sorrow. You remind me of my wife. Faith's hands stilled. She would have liked you girls, would have fought for you harder than I ever could. You have fought plenty. Not hard enough, not soon enough. Thomas leaned forward in his chair. Pa, what more could you have done? Samuel's gaze moved across the ranch, taking inventory of all the ways love could be measured in sweat and sacrifice. I could have lived longer. Hope discovered her condition on a morning when nausea drove her from the breakfast table to the garden, where she retched into the tomato plants with a violence that surprised them both. Daniel found her there, her face pale as morning clouds. Are you sick? She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The truth sat in her throat like swallowed stones. I am with child. Daniel's face went through a series of changes too quick to follow. Joy, confusion, pride, fear. He knelt beside her in the dirt. Mine? The question hung between them like smoke. Hope's silence stretched until it became an answer. Thomas. Daniel's world rearranged itself around that single word. Everything he thought he understood about loyalty, about family, about the careful bonds they had built crumbled like drought-stricken earth. Hope reached for his hand. He pulled away without thinking, then immediately regretted the gesture. It was not meant to happen. Faith was so ill, and Thomas was frightened, and I wanted to comfort him by betraying me, by being human. Daniel stood abruptly. Dust rose around his boots like accusations. Does Faith know? No. Thomas? Yes. Daniel walked to the fence line and gripped the wooden rails until his knuckles went white. Hope watched him from the garden, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat belly. What do you want me to do? Daniel turned back to her. His young face looked older, carved by disappointments he was still learning to carry. I want you to be happy. That is not what I asked. It is the only answer I have. The preacher returned on a Tuesday, his black coat flapping like judgment-made fabric. This time he brought the mayor and 3 members of the town council. Their faces wore the satisfied expressions of men who believed righteousness was their natural inheritance. They found the family working in the barn, sorting grain that might carry them through the coming winter. Samuel sat on a wooden crate, his breathing labored from efforts that once came easily. The sight of his weakness seemed to embolden the visitors. McKenna, this situation has gone on long enough. Samuel looked up slowly. His eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had faced worse enemies than small-town morality. Which situation would that be? Your improper household arrangements, the corruption of these young women, the scandal you have brought upon our community. Mercy stepped forward, grain still clinging to her skirts. We are not corrupted. We are free. The mayor's face reddened. Freedom does not excuse immorality. Neither does morality excuse cruelty. You will come with us now, all three of you. Arrangements have been made for your proper care. Thomas moved to stand beside Samuel. His gentle face carried steel underneath. They are not going anywhere. This is not your decision to make, boy. Jacob joined his brother. Daniel completed the wall of McKenna men between the visitors and the sisters. It is not yours either. The preacher raised his voice to pulpit volume. The Lord demands righteousness in all things. This household is an abomination before God. Faith spoke from behind the protective line of men. God sees our hearts. What do you see? Sin, corruption, the degradation of Christian values. You see what you came looking for. Samuel rose slowly from his crate. His illness had stolen his strength but not his authority. Gentlemen, you are welcome to your opinions. You are not welcome to force them on others. We have legal authority. Show me the papers. The mayor's confidence faltered. His hand moved toward his coat, then stopped. Papers are being prepared. Then come back when you have them. This will not end here, McKenna. Samuel's smile held no warmth. No, it will not. The visitors left with threats trailing behind them like dust from their horses. The family watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer, then turned to face the reckoning that waited inside their own walls. Hope's secret could not be contained much longer. Faith would notice soon, and then the careful balance they had built would shatter like glass under pressure. That evening, Thomas found Hope by the well, drawing water that reflected stars like scattered promises. Her movements carried the careful precision of someone trying not to disturb the universe with unnecessary motion. You told him. I had to. Thomas sat on the well's stone edge. His reflection joined hers in the dark water. And Faith? She will have to know soon. She will blame herself. She should blame us. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called its ancient question to the night. Do you regret it? Hope considered the question while crickets filled the silence with their electric songs. I regret the pain it will cause. I do not regret the choice. Even though it changes everything. Everything was already changing. Thomas reached for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers intertwining with the careful delicacy of people who understood that some moments could not be repeated. What happens now? Hope's free hand moved to her belly, where new life grew in the space between intention and accident. Now we learn what family really means. The next morning brought riders on the horizon, 3 men on horseback, moving with the purposeful gait of those who came bearing ultimatums. Samuel watched them approach from his chair on the porch, his breakfast growing cold beside him. Ezekiel Harper looked worse than when he had auctioned his daughters. His clothes hung loose on a frame that seemed to be consuming itself from within. The men flanking him carried the hard faces of those who solved problems with violence. Samuel rose carefully from his chair. His family gathered behind him without being called, forming ranks that would have made his old unit proud. Ezekiel, you are not welcome here. I have come for my daughters. You sold them. The transaction was completed in front of witnesses. The transaction was invalid. They cannot be sold into slavery. Samuel's hand moved to rest on his gun. They were not sold into slavery. They were bought into freedom. Same thing from where I sit. Then you need to find a different chair. Ezekiel's companions shifted in their saddles. Metal gleamed at their hips. I know what you really wanted them for, McKenna. I know what kind of man buys 3 young women. Mercy stepped forward. Her voice carried across the yard like a blade. You know nothing about the kind of man who saves people from their fathers. You will come with me now. All of you. I have buyers waiting. We are not for sale. Everything is for sale, especially things that pretend they are not. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shadows that reached toward the confrontation like dark fingers. Samuel felt the weight of his gun, the weakness in his chest, the certainty that some fights could not be avoided. Leave now, Ezekiel, do not come back. I will come back with more men, enough men to take what belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you. Ezekiel wheeled his horse around. Dust rose in clouds that obscured his face, but not his final words. We will see about that. The riders disappeared into the heat shimmer, leaving behind the taste of dust and the certainty that the reckoning was coming faster than anyone was prepared to face. Samuel sank back into his chair. His breath came in shallow pulls that seemed to cost him everything. The family stood around him in the growing heat, bound together by choices they could not unmake and consequences they could not avoid. The storm was gathering on the horizon. Dawn came too early, bringing with it the sound of approaching horses. Samuel woke to the rhythm of hoofbeats that carried the weight of final reckonings. His chest burned with each breath, but his hand found his gun with the steadiness of old habit. The sisters were already gone. 3 fresh graves scarred the earth behind the barn. Jacob, Thomas, and Daniel stood over them with shovels still gripped in hands that shook with exhaustion and something darker. Blood had dried on their clothes. On their faces, on the letter Samuel clutched against his wounded chest. Ezekiel Harper and his 2 hired guns lay beneath the Texas soil. The morning sun painted everything the color of rust and regret. Samuel pressed his back against the porch post. The letter crackled in his grip, edges stained with his blood. Words blurred together, but he knew what they said. The words that had started this, that had ended it, that would reshape everything that came after. Sheriff Hawkins rode up alone, his badge catching the light like a fallen star. He dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in the graves, the blood, the way the McKenna boys stood like sentinels over their buried secrets. Samuel. Sheriff. Hawkins removed his hat. His gray hair lay flat against his skull, damp with morning sweat. Town sent me to apologize. Samuel blinked. The words made no sense against the backdrop of fresh graves and spilled blood. Come again? News came in yesterday. President Grant signed new legislation, strengthens the rights of freed slaves, makes it clear that what you did here was legal. More than legal, right? Jacob's shovel hit the ground with a hollow sound. His voice came rough with exhaustion. Where were you 3 days ago? 3 days ago, I was wrong. We all were. Thomas wiped his hands on his shirt, leaving dark stains that would never wash clean. Ezekiel came with guns. Said he was taking the sisters back to sell them. Said he had buyers waiting. Where are the sisters now? Samuel's grip tightened on the letter. Each word felt like swallowing broken glass. Safe. Hawkins studied the graves with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too much death to be surprised by its sudden appearance. I suppose there will be questions. There always are. And answers? Samuel met his eyes across the blood-stained yard. 3 armed men came to take innocent women, by force. We stopped them. Self-defense. Defense of family. Hawkins replaced his hat with the careful precision of someone performing a ritual. I will need statements from all of you. For the record, you will have them. The sheriff mounted, his horse with the slow movements of someone who carried the weight of too many mistakes. Samuel, for what it is worth, I am sorry it came to this. So am I. After Hawkins disappeared into the heat shimmer, the family gathered around Samuel on the porch. His breathing came in shallow pulls that seemed to cost him everything he had left. The letter crumpled further in his grip. Jacob reached for it, but Samuel held on with surprising strength. Not yet. Mercy emerged from the house with fresh bandages and water that steamed in the cool morning air. Her hands moved with the gentle precision of someone who understood that healing required both strength and tenderness. Let me tend to that wound. Samuel allowed her to unbutton his shirt, to clean the blood from the shallow groove across his ribs where Ezekiel's bullet had found its mark. The wound was clean, painful, but not fatal. You will live. For now. Faith brought tea brewed from herbs that might ease pain or simply provide comfort. Her face carried the calm of someone who had learned to find peace in small acts of service. Thomas sat on the porch steps, his head in his hands. The weight of taking life, even in defense of those he loved, settled on his shoulders like stones. Hope knelt beside him. Her hand found his shoulder with the careful touch of someone who understood that some burdens could only be shared, never lifted. You did what you had to do. Did I? You protected your family by becoming a killer. Hope's hand moved to her belly, where new life grew in the space between hope and fear. By choosing love over fear. Daniel stood at the edge of the porch, his young face aged by violence and the weight of choices he had never wanted to make. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, watching for threats that might never come. What happens now? Samuel finally released the letter. It fell to the porch boards with the sound of everything ending. Jacob picked it up, unfolded it with careful hands. His eyes moved across the words, absorbing meaning that changed everything he thought he understood about his father. What is it? Jacob's voice came quiet, thick with something between wonder and grief. Letters, dozens of them. From abolitionists, freed slave communities, politicians. Pa was writing to them, telling them about us. Mercy leaned closer, reading over Jacob's shoulder. Our story. He was sharing our story as proof that integration could work. Thomas looked up from his hands. We were an experiment. You were hope, Samuel corrected. You were proof that people could choose to build something better than what they inherited. The letters scattered in the wind, pages covered with Samuel's careful script carrying their story to places they would never see. Words about dignity, about choice, about the possibility that love could grow from respect rather than ownership. Faith gathered the pages as they fell, her hands careful with the fragments of their father's secret purpose. All this time, you were fighting for more than just us. I was fighting for the idea that families could be chosen, that bonds could be built on something stronger than blood or law or tradition. Hope helped Faith collect the scattered pages. Her voice carried the weight of questions she was still learning to ask. And now? Samuel's smile came slow and tired but genuine. Now you choose what comes next. The months that followed blurred together like seasons compressed into heartbeats. Jacob and Mercy married in the spring, their ceremony witnessed by neighbors who had learned to see past their own prejudices. The ranch prospered under their partnership, accounts balanced by Mercy's precision and Jacob's stubborn determination. Thomas raised Hope's child as his own, never speaking of the circumstances that brought the boy into their lives. Faith died. In childbirth, her last breath carrying prayers for the family she left behind. Hope stood at Faith's graveside in the autumn, her sister's wedding ring heavy on her finger. Without words, she moved her belongings into Thomas's room, claiming the space beside him that Faith had vacated. Mercy watched from the kitchen window as Hope arranged her few possessions on Faith's dresser. The ring caught afternoon light like a promise or a penance. Daniel left for California in the winter, his horse loaded with supplies and dreams of starting fresh where the past held less weight. He kissed Hope goodbye on the forehead. His forgiveness complete even if his heart remained tender. Samuel lived to see his first grandchild take his first steps, died in his sleep on a night when the wind carried the scent of rain that never came. The letters he had written found their way to newspapers and government offices, to churches and meeting halls where people gathered to debate the future of a nation, still learning to live with its choices. Hope stood in the doorway of the room she now shared with Thomas, watching him cradle the child who carried another man's features but his name. Faith's ring felt heavy on her finger, a weight she would carry for the rest of her life. The baby fussed, then settled against Thomas's chest with the trust of innocence. Hope thought about the different ways love could grow, about the choices that shaped families, about the bonds that held when everything else fell away. Outside, The wind carried dust across the land they had fought to keep, to build, to defend. The ranch stretched under an endless sky, home to a family bound by choice rather than blood, by shared burdens rather than easy promises. Hope touched Faith's ring with fingers that remembered her sister's final squeeze, then stepped into the room where Thomas waited with their borrowed child and their chosen future. Some bonds are not chosen. They are earned through the blood of those who came before. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.